Okay.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Paul Richards, and I work with the Educational Opportunity Center. Today, I'm going to be giving a virtual presentation about financial aid and paying for college. So just to start off, a little bit more detail about the Educational Opportunity Center, or the EOC. We're a grant-funded program through the U.S. Department of Education, specifically TRIO, and our grant is housed by Colorado State University. We offer free services in the Adams County community, and I also have offices in the Weld County and Larimer County communities as well. Some of the services that we offer career exploration using virtual job shadow platform to conduct interest assessments and career inventories, to really talk to students more about, what they exactly want to do when they go to college and for a career after the fact. We help with all aspects of the college admissions assistance process, such as school selection, applications, transfer planning, the whole 9 yards. And we also offer primarily services around FAFSA assistance and scholarship searching. We'll be having the contact information for the EOC at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to reach out to us or refer any friends or family that may need some help in those areas to us. And so getting into the meat and potatoes of the presentation that I'm doing today, just a quick overview. First, I'm going to talk about the cost of attendance. So really what costs are associated with attending school. And then we're going to be talking about the federal financial aid that's available to you in order to kind of help pay for that, right? And so that includes grants, loans, and work studies. I'm going to also be talking about some scholarship information, and then kind of finishing off with a couple tips and tricks to reduce the cost of actually going to school. So starting out, thinking about the cost of attendance is really your budget and what it's really going to take in order to pay for school, depending on what kind of school you're going to, whether it's in state versus out-of-state tuition. And I'm going to be talking about something called institutional costs versus non-institutional costs. So starting out, the type of school typically indicates how expensive it's going to be, right? And so we're going to talk about some more affordable schools and then move over to some of the more expensive schools, right? Starting off, community colleges and trade schools are by far the most affordable option for higher education. So all of the tuition and fees are averaged, published yearly tuition and fees based on the state of Colorado. And so some of those examples are like Front Range Community College, Emily Griffith, you have Ames, you have all these different kind of options in the area. And then moving up a ring, there is public universities. And so these tuition and fees average around about $10,000 a year. And some examples of this are CSU, UNC, CU Boulder, Metro State, and there's all kinds of different ones across the state and across the country. Something to also take into consideration is that these are just the tuition and fees, so paying for your classes and student fees, but you also have to consider what kind of living expenses are typically associated with going to a public university. And then at the highest kind of ring, we have private universities. And so the tuition and fees vary, but they can be quite expensive. And the reason for that is that public universities receive government funding to help them run, as private universities do not. Private universities rely more on donorship and student tuition to run the school. One last one that I kind of want to mention is something called for-profit private schools. And we also refer to these as proprietary institutions. And so the tuition and fees for these schools can be very, very expensive. And depending on the program, these schools not only do not receive that public funding assistance, but they also are looking to make profit off of the students. And so those tuitions and fees can get really hiked up. Anytime a student is considering attending one of these schools, I always suggest that they look for more affordable opportunities and alternatives to kind of earn that same degree. And so all of those rates were based on in-state tuition. And so if you're planning on going out of state, here's a quick example of how crazy it can kind of get blown out of proportion. So for 15 credits at Metro State University, for a Colorado resident, it is only going to be $4,040. And for an out-of-state resident, or non-resident, I should say, it almost triples in cost. And that is also due to kind of the rates at which the public assistance coming from tax money kind of goes to benefit those who have been paying into it, kind of that state tax rate and things like that. So touching on institutional versus non-institutional costs. Institutional costs are those tuition and fees, and they're non-negotiable, right? They're fixed depending on how many credits you're really taking, whether you're a full or a part-time student. And then the fees associated with being a student at any institution, such as student services fees, campus-based fees. There can be certain courses that are more expensive because they use certain technology or certain materials. So these are those institutional costs. They are fixed, and you can't really do too much to, kind of mix that up. But the non-institutional costs, they're a little more flexible. And these are kind of those living expenses, right? So room and board, your rent, your bills, whether you're living in an apartment or at home with family, or you're living in the dorms, these all kind of vary significantly based on how much money you're really gonna have to kind of pay for that room and board. They also consider your transportation. So if you're commuting to school every day, things like that, insurance, all of that stuff. And then food and other living expenses, right? You're eating, you're needing to buy clothes, all of that kind of stuff. And so now that we kind of talked a little bit about what that cost of going to school is, let's examine a little bit more about what kind of aid is out there to help you, right? Right now, I'm going to focus mostly on the federal aid, right? Directly from the government. And so we're going to be talking about what that is, who is eligible, how to apply. And then we're going to kind of talk about the types of financial aid that's available through that, and then what you have to do in order to stay eligible to receive that aid. So first and foremost, the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, is what that acronym is. And so to be able to apply for that, you must complete the free application online, and it's open to US citizens and eligible non-residents, such as permanent residents or asylum seekers. And then you also must have a high school diploma or high school equivalency by the time that you are planning on starting your program in order to use that aid. And so they also want you to be enrolled in an eligible degree or certificate program. And usually that's something more than 6 months in length. And they just want to make sure that that money is going to an eligible program. If you are ineligible, there is something called the Colorado application for state financial aid. So even if you're not eligible to receive that federal money, there is state funding available to you, and most schools will have some kind of link to this alternative to the FAFSA called the Colorado application for state federal aid, or CASFA. So in order to apply for the FAFSA, the first step is creating an FSA ID login. And so that stands for Federal Student Aid Identification. And essentially it is a profile that you create with a username and password that allows you to access some of the federal student aid websites, the FAFSA being one of them. And so many of you will probably be dependent on your parents from a FAFSA standpoint. So your parent may also need to create an FSA ID. Since the parent's information is being provided on the FAFSA, the FSA ID acts as a electronic signature at the end of the application, ensuring that everything that the parent entered in terms of their financial information is accurate. And so once you have that first step, you are then able to, as the student, log into the FAFSA application, and then putting your and your parents' financial information in order to get them to establish your financial need and then see how much help that they're actually going to be able to give you. I will forward to your counselors the information about this. We have a FAFSA checklist that goes over all of the required information that you need in order to fill out a FAFSA. And you are more than welcome. And actually, I encourage you to set up a virtual appointment with either myself or one of my colleagues at EOC in order to get some one-on-one help with filling out this application, because it can be long and it can be tedious, and any kind of small mistakes can kind of keep you from getting the actual help that you should be getting. So keep that in mind. Important dates for the FAFSA. Every year, you are required to do a FAFSA for the upcoming academic year in order to get money. And so the FAFSA always opens on October 1st of every year. So the recent FAFSA that just opened will be for the 2021/2022 academic year, and it'll be going off of your 2019 tax information. Again, like I mentioned, one-on-one appointments are available via Zoom or via whatever kind of platform that you really have accessible to you, and we're available and willing to help with that entire process. So once you apply for the FAFSA, there are 3 different types of aid that's really going to be available to you through the federal government: grants, work study, and loans. So the grant that is available to you through the federal government is called the Pell Grant. And again, grants are awards that you do not have to worry about paying back. And the amounts change yearly, and depending on how much financial need they determine that you have. The maximum award is $6,345. But depending on that, depending on what your financial need is, you may receive a portion of that, the whole amount, or even none at all, depending on some of that financial information. Other things that affect the award is if you're planning on attending school just part-time, they do reduce that award based on how many classes that you're taking, since that's kind of going to dictate how expensive school is. They just don't want to give you full-time money to attend school only part-time. There are other grants in addition to the Pell Grant. And so a lot of those are actually giving out by the institution, right? And so those are grants that the school gives you based on, how much extra money that they have in order to make students' financial aid packages a little more attractive to the student and help them out kind of covering costs. And so those are first come, first serve. So I always encourage students to do their FAFSA as soon as possible and get their kind of follow-up steps at the financial aid office at their individual school done as soon as possible. So some of that money is more available to you. The state also gives out, like, first come, first serve state student grants. So always encourage students to do it as soon as possible. There's also additional federal supplemental grants that you can apply for through the financial aid office at your school if you kind of show that exceptional need of kind of that cost that's not being covered. Specifically, if you are planning on being an educator or a teacher, there is the Teacher Education Assistance Grant, or TEACH, and you can apply for that as well. But you do have to, if awarded, sign a contract saying that you're going to be teaching in an underserved area for a specific amount of time. And then there's also Iraq and Afghanistan service grants, and these are for non-Pell eligible students who have had a parent pass away due to their service in the Iraq or Afghanistan war. Moving on to work study. So work study is a bit different in the fact that grants are money that is awarded to you that you don't have to pay back, and versus loans, which is money that you can borrow and expected to pay back at a later date. Work study is a fund that the school receives from a federal government in order to help pay students as they are working on campus. And so that's available to full-time or part-time students, and it's administered by the school. And if you are awarded work study, they give you a certain amount that you can work and earn over the course of the semester. And you'll only receive that money after you have been working. And then contrary to popular belief, it's actually given to you in a check, just like any other job, instead of going straight to your account. So this is also a great way to get involved on campus, get involved at your school, and at the same time make a little bit of money while doing something on campus for work. Moving on to loans. Again, loans are awards that need to be paid back, and they do this in a couple of different ways. So the main two ways that they'll break up any loan amounts that they are offering you is direct subsidized loan, right? And I put a little happy face next to that one, and direct unsubsidized loan, and I put a little frowny face next to that one. And so the main differences of this loan, even though they both have the same fixed interest rates for the academic year, subsidized loans, no interest will accrue as long as you're enrolled in school, as opposed to the unsubsidized, the interest is going to accrue whether you're in school or not. And so both of these loans have what's called a grace period, where they do not expect you to start repayment until 6 months after you either unenroll from school or graduate from your college or program. And so a lot of times students are really wary of kind of taking on that debt, as they should be. So you do not have to take any loans that's offered to you, but they are there for you as a resource if you have no other way of kind of paying for school, right? And I always encourage students to try to mitigate their debt and keep it as low as possible if they can, right? And so if you're in a position to where, you know, you've maxed out your loans, you've maxed out your grants, all of that stuff, there are options to where you can get something called a Direct Plus parent loan and apply for that through the school, as opposed to the subsidized and unsubsidized loans, which are in your name as a student. The Direct Plus loan can be applied for by your parents, and then it goes, you know, into their responsibility at that point. And then there's also something called a Federal Perkins loan, and this is for students with exceptional financial need, and really the last kind of option in getting some extra additional money for school. So once you do receive your financial aid, there are some standards that you must maintain in order to keep your eligibility for it. And so this is kind of staying in that good academic standing. The satisfactory academic progress standards are a 2.0 minimum GPA. So they want to make sure that you are passing and earning credits in your classes. They also want to have completed at least 67% of your classes, right? And so I always tell students, don't drop your classes without speaking with your academic advisor first, because if you're in 12 credits and you come to the point in the semester where you're kind of struggling with passing some of those classes, there's an option to do something called a withdrawal. But if you withdraw from, 2 of your 4 classes, that automatically puts you at 50%, and it's going to make you ineligible for financial aid, right? So always kind of talk to your advisors before making any kind of those decisions, right? And so now that we talked about the federal aid that's available to you, I'm going to touch briefly on scholarships. And so scholarships, those are also awards that do not need to be paid back. And there's 3 different kinds. There's merit-based, and so these are given out to students based on their performance in academics, extracurricular activities, sports, community service, things like that. And these scholarships usually have strict requirements in order to earn them, and then also conditions in order to keep them. Much like the satisfactory academic progress that we were talking about, if you're on a merit-based scholarship, that scholarship can put some conditions to where, you need to at least have a 3.0, or you need to do X, Y, Z over the course of the semester to maintain your eligibility for this, right? There's also need-based scholarships. And so those scholarships always would like to see your FAFSA results, because that's a good baseline of like what exactly your financial need is. And then we have something called lottery-based scholarships, and these are kind of chosen at random, and every student has like an equal chance of winning. It's kind of like being in like a sweepstakes or something like that, right? And so talking about where to find some free money for school, right? I always want to frame it in terms of what your competition is going to be, right? And so looking at the smallest kind of pool of competition is competing against the students at the same school as you, right? So institutions and schools will offer their own scholarships that are only available to those students that attend that specific school. They even break it down by your specific major or department. And you also, excuse me, you will also often find campus organizations or programs on campus offering some scholarships as well. So always start by looking at the school that you're planning on attending when going to apply for scholarships. Then kind of like the next step up would be around your local community. Many times employers will offer some kind of tuition assistance scholarships or tuition reimbursement programs. So if you're currently working, it's always a good idea to check with your employer to see if they offer any kind of tuition assistance. Local committees or foundations, such as like the Rotary Scholarship, the Eagles Lodge, things like that, they always are some of those programs that we see have very few people actually apply for scholarships. So if you're applying to scholarships like that, your chance of getting them is a lot higher, right? And then I'll also check your community organizations and local nonprofits. And then kind of moving up is the statewide scholarships. And these are scholarships offered by the state of Colorado. This website should be a good resource in order to kind of find some of those scholarships. So check that out. And then thinking about kind of that grand scale national scholarships. And these are the scholarships that you'll find listed on websites like these. However, that is the largest competition pool. So your chances of getting those scholarships are smaller than the others, right? And so then when you're actually looking for the scholarships in the process, I always find that it's helpful for students to kind of grasp if we monetize it, right? Because going for scholarships and applying scholarship after scholarship after scholarship, and maybe not even ever like receiving any of them, can get kind of disheartening, right? It can get a little rough. So I always like to put it in that monetized terms, right? So if you spend 100 hours applying for scholarships, but only end up receiving $5,000, that's still like working for $50 an hour, you know? So that kind of helps with that motivational piece after you're sitting there scholarship after scholarship, right? So that's just a little tidbit of information. When you are searching, beware of scholarship scams. No scholarship, at least in the beginning stages, will ever ask you for a fee, or asking for your personal information such as social security numbers, things like that. So be wary of that. One thing I'll also like to say is if you're applying to merit-based scholarships, only apply to them if you meet those requirements, right? If a scholarship is stating that you have to have a 3.0 in order to apply for that scholarship, and you have a 2.99999, don't even bother, because they will not include your application in consideration of that. So another kind of hang up that I see a lot of students kind of find themselves in is they're only kind of applying to the big dollar amount scholarships, right? But don't discount those smaller scholarships, because more often than not, they're a little easier to receive. And then that money really does start to add up. So then the final piece of advice that I have for applying for scholarships is using your personal story to empower yourself. Oftentimes I'll see that students are, have gone through some rough times in their life. And instead of kind of highlighting that and showing, that at the forefront, they kind of feel like a little maybe ashamed of those things and want to hide that. But at the end of the day, there's just another person on the end of that application reviewing your application. So really use those stories and hang-ups to kind of convey your strength and how you got over that, and kind of, use that ethos and appeal to them emotionally, right? Kind of set yourself out. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is some tips and tricks to reduce your costs, right? And so a big, huge thing is books, right? So every time you register for classes every semester, they will tell you what kind of textbooks you need, if they're required or not. And buying those new from the bookstore can really, really be pricey, right? It's crazy because they'll put out a new edition of a book every year and charge top dollar for it. But there's a lot of options when it comes to buying your books. You can buy them online, buying them used, or even programs to rent your books, or even talking to classmates that may have had that class to kind of, borrow their books, rent it from them. But this is a huge, huge kind of thing to consider when you're starting school, because that can get really, really pricey. Another thing is the associate's to bachelor's pathway. This is working on your associates at a community college before transferring to a university. If you're planning on getting a bachelor's degree, this cuts a lot of costs out tremendously, because going to a community college for 2 years and then going to a bachelor or a university for the second 2 years can really help offset that cost. It's a lot more affordable than just going straight to a university and paying 4 years of university tuition for that, right? And then, so just to wrap this up, the main idea is you have to know how much school is going to cost, and you have to have a good idea of what kind of money or assistance you're getting, and kind of reconcile the two. And that is kind of it in terms of that. I will put up this contact information. This is our office phone. Currently, due to COVID, we are working remotely. However, our voicemail still works. So if you'd like to call and leave a message, we would get back to you as soon as possible. And then also here is my personal email. If you would like to reach out to have any questions, or if you would like to set up a one-on-one appointment to discuss any of this stuff more, please feel free to do so. And thanks for watching my virtual little recorded presentation. Oh, I think you're muted, Cheryl.
Great, and that was recorded. I swore I clicked it, but I just wanted to tell Pathways, families, and students that thank you for watching this, and please let me or especially Paul know if you have any questions and set up an appointment with them as soon as you can, because October 1st has definitely passed. Okay, thank you, and see you later.
Okay. All right, Cheryl. Thank you.
Okay, did I hit the, oh, stop, hold on. Boop. Do you want to stop the